Globalization is a widely discussed topic. It is therefore not all that easy to explain such a complicated term in simple words. Now, let's start from the beginning with the background to globalization. So, advances in technology such as mobile phones, airplanes, telephones, and the internet have made the growth of food and communication networks possible. Amongst other things, this means that people and countries can exchange information and goods more quickly and in a less complicated way.
So we all know that globalization is the procedure that allows for seamless cross-border movement of persons and goods. Despite all of this, there is still some moral challenges that affects globalization. There are a lot, such as the labor standards, globalization, environmental standards globalization, human rights, the corruption, and cultural diversity revolving around the world.
World Health Organization, or WHO. According to WHO, globalization can be defined as the increased interconnectedness and interdependence of peoples and countries. It is generally understood to include two interrelated elements of the opening international borders to increasingly fast flow the goods, services, finances, and etc. According to Thomas Friedman, he defined the globalization as the inexorable integration of markets, transportation systems, and communication systems.
Now let's go to the rise of radical inequality.
Globalization can increase wage inequality in a relatively rich country by increasing the imports of manufactured goods using predominantly low-skilled labor from developing countries. Conversely, it opens more opportunities for exports in high-tech firms that use more high-skilled labor. Global inequality cannot only be driven and measured through income and goods that we receive from other countries. We can also determine through other factors such as age, gender, ethnicity, disability, race, sexual orientation, class, and religion that results in equal distribution of resources, opportunities, and power that molds every individual.
Conversely, globalization can lessen inequality by transferring revenue from prosperous to developing nations. But inequality may increase as the rich people adjust to the profound shift. By increasing the importation of manufactured products created with low-skilled labor in developing nations, globalization can worsen wage disparity in a country that is already relatively affluent. On the other hand, it expands the export potential for high-tech companies that employ more highly qualified workers. Right now, pressures brought on by globalization tend to make inequality worse. As the level of competitiveness rises due to today's increasingly integrated global economy, we need to know what those forces and how they work.
Because of the significantly disparate rates of economic development, globalization perpetuates inequality across countries. In particular, it expands the wealth and poverty gap. More productive businesses from industrialized nations benefit from open marketplaces. The forced market opening exposes developing countries to unfair competition and leads to the exploitation of the poor by the rich. The exit threat of mobile asset holders increases their political influence at the expense of labor, resulting in haves and have-nots because of economic dynamics that favor certain social groups considerably more than others do. Some contend that while globalization and how it affects income distribution may cause inequality to rise in some countries, it decreases it globally since money is transferred from well-off countries to poorer ones.
A way in which globalization can create increased inequality is by increasing the demand for and returns to higher skilled work and lowering the expected earnings of people in their relatively low skill and low knowledge occupations. One of the driving forces of foreign distinct investment is that resources tend to flow where is the unit cost of production is lowest. This is the case with light manufacturing, for example, where a lot of investments are flowing to the countries such as Vietnam, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, and Indonesia. FDI creates more formal employment and incomes of people employed in such sectors, but perhaps at the extreme of similar workers in higher income countries whose skills are no longer in demand. They are therefore at the greater risk of unemployment and persistent relative poverty. Many have been pushed into the poorly paid jobs in services linked to gig economy. People affected often that they have been left behind the forces of globalization.
The world economy has become more unequal over the last 2 centuries. Globalization is undergoing radical change. The free movement of capital, goods, labor, technology, and innovation has lowered the cost of providing goods and services. One way globalization can increase inequality is through the effects of increasing specialization and trade. A rise in the trade to GDP ratio signifies an increase in the volume of value of trade between countries and regions. Globalization can increase wage inequality in a relatively rich country by increasing the imports of manufactured goods using predominantly low-skilled labor from developing countries. Conversely, it opens more opportunities for exports in high-tech firms that use more high-skilled labor.
Utilitarianism. Utilitarian ethics is a normative ethical system that is primarily concerned with the consequences of ethical decisions. Therefore, it can be described as a theological theory or consequentialist theory, which are essentially the same thing, both having a notion that the consequence of the act is the most important determinant of the act being moral or not.
As we adapt globalization, it is inevitable to have instances where something will be compromised for the pleasure of others. An example of this is the attempt of our national government to push for modernization of public transportation while phasing out the old jeepneys. Former President Rodrigo Duterte planned to take all jeepneys that are 15 years or older off the roads because of the pollution they are causing. He wanted to replace them with more eco-friendly, minivan-like versions that are bigger, safer, and produces fewer emissions. However, the new model that the government wants jeepney drivers to purchase cost 1.6 to 1.8 million pesos. Such price have a wide gap to the annual income of a jeepney driver, which only amounts to 75,000 to 80,000. George San Mateo, the head of the transport rights group called Piston, warned the government that the cost to run and maintain these new models will be passed on to the commuters in the form of increased fares. According to San Mateo, let us remember that the commuters are some of the poorest and poor of the Philippines. San Mateo also added that their organization, Piston, has no problem with modernization. He said that we are progressive, so we are not anti-development. But the problem with the modernization programs is it is anti-poor and profit-oriented. This shows that as a third world country, our venture of adapting globalization using utilitarian ethics can still impose negative effects even though the positive motive is present.
I will provide to you the pros and cons of the utilitarian ethics. First is the pros. We got to focus on happiness as a society. When we look to our societies around the world today, it is clear that all people are not experiencing this emotion. People tend to feel happier when they have access to more financial resources. In a world where utilitarianism is the primary emphasis of each action, we could reduce unemployment rates. So how can we reduce unemployment rates? By reducing occupational immobility and improve household incomes, because we would be looking at the effects instead of the process for the results. Next one is the cons. It overlooks that people can become inured to their situations. For example, some people in their undeveloped societies may consider themselves happy despite their low standard in living. Due to this, they might find it hard to leave their current situation, which will severely limit their opportunities.
Deontological ethics is a moral philosophy where the usual ethical definition of right or wrong is based on a series of rules to follow instead of the consequences which occur from such a decision. It is a concept which is based on a person's obligation or duty to treat others with respect, because the definition of morality through deontological ethics focuses on actions instead of outcomes. Then, a decision to not take action still becomes a moral choice. You're not focusing on the outcome with this philosophy. The emphasis is placed on the journey that you take in order to get to your destination. It is a system which works on the foundation of absolutes. There is no room for negotiation with the choice. You will either make an ethical correct decision or one that is not. If that element of truth applies to religious circumstances, then the spiritual definition of salvation can depend on your ability to determine how to go through life without harming anyone else while still following divine truths.
That was a lot of important information from our very well-known researchers. Do you agree with me, Mr. Jericho?
Yes, Miss Doreen, I also learned a lot about the importance of globalization and the World Health Organization, the connection of the rise of radical inequality, the utilitarian ethics, and the deontological ethics according to the globalization too. So, what about you, Mr. Kerr? Hermano?
Globalization is a name given to the reality that the world is becoming more and more closely linked by international trade, monetary policies, investments, and high-speed telecommunications. It is no longer a choice. It has already happened. If you don't believe me, just look at the labels on your clothes, the country of origin of manufactured goods, and the resource or sources of your food. It is getting harder and harder to find anything made in the good old. Many say globalization is a threat, but some say it's good. Now let me ask you a question. Is globalization a good thing or just a threat to everybody?